Now, hopefully you already know how to create basic animation. To add a bit more complexity, we can adjust our keyframe even more. So for example, we want to have this animation from start, and here on 1 second we will go up like this. And if we will press 0 numpad, we can see that it's pretty linear motion and it doesn't really look that much exciting. We can select any of our keyframes and click on this graph editor. And make sure that you go into this list and change to edit speed graph. Just click on it. And in this way we will be able to change the speed between these keyframes and add a bit more character to it. If you cannot see a keyframe here, you need to select your position. You will see both of your keyframes. Just select this second one and you will see this little handle beside this square. So let's click on this handle and drag to the left. Click and hold and drag to the left and drag it down to this baseline. So we would have this kind of shape. What this graph tells us? It tells us that we have a really fast motion at the start with this spike, and then it goes slower at the end. So now if I'm gonna press 0 numpad, you can see that we have exactly that. Really fast motion at the start and really slow at the end, which looks a lot more interesting than before. So if I'm gonna press Ctrl Z to undo this motion, you can see that before it was really boring. And if I'm gonna press Ctrl Shift Z to redo this motion, it gives more interesting kind of look. This is basically the first movement which I've added in this animation. So now let's try to add another motion which goes in a circle like this. So for this I've created another keyframe here below. And as you remember from previous videos, when you're creating new motion, it creates this kind of bezier. If you don't want this kind of bezier, you would want to go to keyframe interpolation and change it to the linear. But in our case, we want to have this kind of ellipse motion, which is not linear. So this is where we can select our keyframe and we will get this kind of shape. And this is how we can exactly manipulate to the way which we want this motion to be. So for this ellipse motion, we are going to use this handle. And the easier way to create this ellipse motion is to go just down like this. And then by clicking on this handle, drag it to the left. And if we will zoom in into our video, you'll see that this point also have this kind of handle. And we can also drag it to the left like this. And it's a good idea to have these handles same kind of scale, because if we will set this to smaller scale, you'll get this kind of shape which is not that symmetric. So let's go with the same kind of distance and maybe move it lower, so we would have some space here for our animation text. And now you can see that we have this animation which goes up, then round shape like this, and we will add this closing shape a bit later. But first I want to change this kind of curved motion. And what we want to do is to select all of these keyframes and then select this handle. If you will hold Alt key on keyboard, as you can see I'm holding Alt, and by clicking on this handle, you'll be able to change only this part of this path. And if you will release Alt key, you'll see that we are changing both of these handles. And this is not what we want. So in case if you already change it like this, just release it and press Ctrl Z to undo. And then once again hold Alt key and change it so it would have this kind of straight line up. So let's finish our animation and move it this to exactly this point here. And by the way, if you want to move it to exact point as it was, you can not just move it manually, you can just delete this point and just select this keyframe, which is exactly this point at the top. I found it here. I can just copy this keyframe and then go here and press Ctrl V to paste. So in this case, I know for sure that it will come to the same place, because I've copied exactly the same position. And now what we want to do, once again, we can just select all of these keyframes to see all of these handles and adjust this handle once again. Just drag it to the right, about the same kind of amount as here, and also zoom in here to be able to find this handle. We can just move this one out of the way and then select this one and move it to the right like this, and then set this handle back what it was. Then zoom out by using wheel on the mouse. And if you will hold spacebar on keyboard, it will change to this cursor, which allows us to move this around. So hold spacebar and then left mouse click to move around your image. And then just click on this handle and move it to the right to about same amount as here below. And finally, we would want to change this position to the center as it was. So to set it to the center, we can just click on this time cursor and scroll it to the beginning and find this keyframe, which is exactly at the center. Select it and press Ctrl+C to copy. And about here, we can just press Ctrl+V to paste. So now if we are going to press 0 on numpad, we will see all the animation. As you can see, all animation is set, except this final motion. We can select this final keyframe, and we need to adjust this final kind of motion, which went a little bit crazy. So I believe this is this handle. We can just click on it and adjust it like this. Just don't be afraid to select any of these handles and change it, because you can always press Ctrl+Z to undo some action. So this is really handy, and you don't have to be afraid to do something wrong, because you can always go to Edit Undo, which is Ctrl+Z. So let's try to change this handle and also align with this path. In this way, this last motion will be also straight down. So now, as you remember, this motion is correct, but the timing is a bit off. So let's press 0 on numpad to see better what is going on. So this first motion looks really good, and this motion of the going around is a bit trickier, because we want it to go slower at the start, then here fast, and here slower at the end. So to see this motion in the graph, we can select this position, go to Graph Editor, and see this kind of motion. As you can see, it's a bit messed up. We want to see this spike at the beginning, because we have this really fast motion at the start. Then this slowed down motion is really good. But now we can see that we have some constant movement. We want to have a slower start, like it's gaining the speed. Then here fast motion, as it already set it here, and slower movement at the end. So let's change this keyframe. We want to click on this little handle right beside the square and drag it to the right and down. So now, as you can see, we already have this slower start, which is exactly what we want. But we have here two spikes, which can mess up the animation, and slower movement at the end, which exactly what we want. So let's see how it looks. I want to see only this part just before this last motion. So I can just click here on the work area and cut it to this motion to be able to check only this part of animation. So let's press 0 to see if all works fine. So as you can see, it almost looks good, but with these two spikes, we can clearly feel that it has maximum speed here, then it stopped for a moment here, then already gained some speed, and have this really nice animation at the end. So let's press 0 on numpad to see one more time. And now our goal is not to have this kind of hiccup in this point. And to eliminate this problem, we want to change this handle. We can also click here to zoom in to see it better. And we want to have this as a one spike of speed. So just by clicking on this handle and dragging to the right, and here by clicking on this handle and dragging to the left, you can see that we kind of blend in this spike. So by changing these two handles, we want to have this seamless one spike. And in this way, if we will press 0 on numpad, we will have this really good motion without any stopping motion here in the middle, which is exactly what we want. So now we fixed this problem, and now you can see that even our graph looks smoother. And also we want to repeat this with this final movement at the end. So we have this slow movement, we want to start with a bit slower movement. So we would have these kind of nice waves. Slower movement here at the end also. So let's press 0 on numpad to see it. So basically, if your graph looks like this, you can already tell that you have pretty smooth animation, because your graph shouldn't really have corners. For smooth animation, you always need to check your graph editor, and you should check if it goes really smooth like this. And in this way, as you can see, we get this really nice motion. Okay, so we've created our first smooth animation. And by the way, if your timing has a bit of issues, just make sure that you have the right spacing between these keyframes. Just exit your graph editor and make sure that you have kind of similar timing. So in the next video we are going to add a bit of character to this circle, so we would clearly see where it's about to go. It will be light introduction to the 3D kind of animation. See you in the next video. Okay, so let's add this character into our scene. It's really easy to do. We just need to create a map which we are going to apply on top of our circle. So to create a map, we can go to Project and create new composition. It's not exactly a map, more like a texture. So let's call it Texture and click OK. So now as you can see, we created another composition, and we can also see it here in our project panel. So we can always go back to our animation which we had and switch to our texture which we created just by clicking here. And by the way, don't forget to save your project. Just go to File, Save, or Ctrl S on keyboard to save it. So let's create a texture for our character. First of all, I want to create a rectangle. It will be our bottom part. Just left click and drag like this. By the way, we can click here and apply this title action save. In this way we can see the center of our screen. And I want to align with the center like this. As you can see, I'm aligning right here at the center. And I want to change this fill to this kind of orangish kind of color. Now let's click OK. We can also create another shape. We can just select it and call it bottom, just by pressing Enter on keyboard to rename it and call it bottom. Then deselect it by clicking here and click here to create another rectangle. Let's create this left side like this, and as you can see, I'm aligning with the center of our screen. Let's call it left and change the fill to this more kind of reddish tone and click OK. And by the way, the hierarchy of these layers matter. So basically what is on top, it will be on top here as well. So if I'm gonna set this layer below this bottom, you can see that this bottom now on top of this layer. So it's good to keep in mind that this order matters. So now let's create our right part. We can once again deselect any of these layers, select this rectangle tool, and just left mouse click and drag it to the left like this. And let's change this color lighter yellow like this and click OK. And let's set it below, so it will be below these layers, and let's call it right. Okay, so now we have our texture. We can select this selection tool and go back to animation. Let's set it this time cursor to the start, and let's drop this texture here into our animation composition. Just left mouse click and drag it here. And now we can add effect called CC Sphere. Just drag it on this texture layer. And keep in mind that sometimes this effect can crash your software. So it's a good idea to save it from time to time so you would not have to redo some steps. And as you can see, we have this really cool sphere, which looks really cool and even has some shading. And our more like a 2D kind of animation, we don't want to have some shading. So let's go to shading and set it this diffuse to 0, as well as this specular, which we have here. Also, let's set it to 0. And ambient light, we want to set to 100%, which basically will reveal our colors, but we will not have any shading, and now it looks like 2D image. But what is cool about this, that we can close this shading. Once again, make sure that you have saved your project. You go to rotation, and we can change the rotation and x-axis like this. As you can see now, it looks like it looking down or up. Y-axis, now it looks like from left to right. And Z-axis, like it's rotating like this. I'm gonna press Ctrl Z to reset all of these values to 0. So now, as you can guess, we will animate these properties. But before, we want to align this texture with our circle. So now it's at the center, and we can just press S on keyboard and make it smaller. And we can use wheel on the mouse to zoom in and just change it to cover our circle like this. In my case, it's 38, but in your case, it could be a bit bigger or a bit smaller value. And now, as you can see, we are getting closer to this animation which I created for preview. But if we will scroll through this timeline, you can see that it doesn't repeat this motion of our circle. And what we want to do is to go to very first frame where we aligned it perfectly. Let's close it here. And we want to select this texture and parent to this circle. Just by clicking on this pick whip, click and drag to this circle and release it. As you can see, it now follows this second circle, which is here, second circle. And if we will scroll through, you can see that it exactly follows the same position, which looks great. And now we want to add animation to the texture itself. So first movement is pretty easy. We just want to change this rotation X. So let's set it to 0. And here at the beginning, we want just to click on this rotation X and create a keyframe. To see this keyframe which we just created, we want to press U on keyboard. It will reveal only this keyframe. And now, skipping few frames like this, we want to change this value like this circle looks up. And then later, about here, we want to reset this animation to 0. So now if we will scroll through, we already have this first part. But as you remember, we always can go to Graph Editor and check our animation. And in our case, it's linear motion, and we have these bad rectangle kind of movements. So to fix this, we want to select this last keyframe and move it to the left by this handle like this and check the animation. So now we have this smooth animation at the end, but we need to make sure that this keyframe, which represents looking up, stays a bit longer. So to do this, we can just select this keyframe and go to Graph Editor, and we can just a bit stretch from here and to here. So as always, we want to have this kind of smooth motion in our keyframes. And if we will zoom in to see it better, I want to get rid of this sharp spike. So basically I can just spread out these handles to have this spike a bit less. So by doing this, you can see that we've created this more smoother motion. Okay, so now we want to add this second movement. Basically, to create this animation, I didn't really animate how it looks down, then up, then all of these parts. Because it goes so fast that it doesn't matter where it looks at this point. So this is why we want to animate only this first part, as you can see like this, where it should look, where it goes. At this part, as you can see, it doesn't matter where it looks because it's really fast. And then, as you can see, I've animated this last motion where it looks here, and then here and down, and this. So let's repeat this motion. This time we would want to animate all of these properties. This is why we want to create a keyframe about here at the end of this animation. we want to create a keyframe here and here, which basically would tell to this effect that these animations will not change at the beginning. So if I'm gonna press U on keyboard, you can see that we've created these keyframes, which doesn't change at the beginning. But now we want to change it here. So we want to change it like it looks to the left, and maybe add a bit of this rotation so it would be more interesting. And finally we will change this X rotation so it would look down. And by playing around with these three values, we can add this trajectory of ball where it looks. So let's press 0 numpad to see this animation. So I'm pretty happy with this starting motion. And by the way, the shortcut for making these keyframes go slower at the start is just to select these keyframes and press F9. I don't want to press F9 on this keyframe because it will mess up this animation as well. So for this keyframe, I just want to select it and move it by this handle manually like this. So now we have this really cool animation at the start. We can ignore this part, and about here we want to change this rotation and this rotation as well as X rotation. And basically what we want to do is to angle our ball like it's looking where it should be in this moment. And now when I've set these keyframes where it should look, you can see that After Effects is already trying to change this position, which is not exactly what we want. We want this kind of direction to keep up. So what we want to do is to select these keyframes, move it here, so they will happen later, and just copy these keyframes which we already have. Just select them, press Ctrl C and Ctrl V to paste it here, which will basically freeze this kind of movement. And about from this moment, we want it to change it where it looks up to this moment. And now we can just play around with the timing. So after this really fast movement, we will starting to see this animation of looking up. And finally here, where it stops, set these keyframes to 0, to this original position. And we can select all of these keyframes, press F9, which will make this animation slower at the end. And let's press 0 numpad to see this preview. And finally let's add this motion which we've added at the start, where it looks down like this, and where it stops we will set to 0. We can just spread it a bit, and maybe this final motion we want to add a bit more interesting kind of look by dragging on this handle. And basically it's always a good idea to end your animation on last keyframe, which goes with this kind of curve. It gives a nice finishing touch to your animation. Okay, great, we have this animation which really looks cool. In the next video we are going to learn how to create this kind of paths which will give this more professional look to your animations. See you in the next video!